So let's start the recording. So I have to start the recorder because I do want to post these out there still. So the firemen were fighting this, saying, no, it should be up to us when we take the corresponding time off. And the county was saying, no, we can just schedule you for less time. That way it'll be used up. Because what was happening is the firemen weren't taking the compensating time off, and they were waiting for the end of the year to come. And then they were going to demand that they be paid in dollars instead of time. And the county didn't want to do that. So the county said, we're going to start scheduling you for less than your 40 hours in order to use up this comp time. The firemen didn't like that, so we end up in court. We end up in the United States Supreme Court eventually. Prior cases, there were situations where the court had said, yes, we will allow that to happen, but only if there was an agreement ahead of time that that was allowed to happen. And there was no prearranged agreement in Harris County's situation. Ultimately, the Supreme Court said, you know what? This law is all about protecting the employees and protecting the employee-employer relationship. We've created the fact that we allow compensating time off. The firemen were being compensated 1.5 times in time off, but it's up to them to make sure that it's being used. And as a result, if the firemen weren't using it voluntarily, that the county had the right to tell them, no, you're not allowed to work this week because you've got too much compensating time. They would still, of course, get paid, but they didn't have to physically work. All right, so those are some of the court cases. Obviously, when the court starts stepping in and now interpreting how the things are supposed to be done, it's no longer a matter of a question of whether we have the right to pass the law, but now it's how do we enforce the law. So we're all well beyond whether or not these wage and hour laws are even constitutional. They are. Okay, moving along, let's start talking about minimum wage. Okay, so the first minimum wage was set in 1938, and that was 25 cents an hour. Currently, it's $7.25 an hour, and the last raise in minimum wage was July 24th, 2009. Okay, so now let's talk about, can you be paid less than minimum wage? Well, come on, check that. This sounds kind of crazy. If it is a minimum wage, how can you be paid less than minimum wage? That shouldn't be allowed. It's not allowed. You can't be telling me that, yeah, it's allowed. I'm sorry. Yes, you can pay less than minimum wage. Certain types of employees can be paid less than minimum wage. All right, so we talk about people that rely on tips as part of their wages. So we're talking about food service people here, waiters and waitresses. They rely on tips in order to make a decent living. The employers, the restaurants, have federal permission to pay less than minimum wage, because the theory here is that the server is getting most of their pay not from the employer, but from the customer through the tips. Okay, they're allowed to reduce that by, let's see, one who received from tips from customers. The employer is allowed to reduce the minimum wage paid to that worker by up to 40%. with the difference to be made up by tips received. Okay, so they're allowed to reduce it down by 40%. So that means 60% of the $7.25. So if we did that math, it'd be 4 something, I guess. No, yeah, I guess. So you're allowed to be paid less than minimum wage. Now, of course, the server is supposed to be reporting their tips. For a couple of reasons. Tips are taxable because it's considered to be part of your wages, so it's going to be part of your compensation, and you have to pay tax on that. But wages paid below $7.25 are allowed. What other kinds of issues do we have when we start talking about minimum wage? Is everybody paid hourly? See, not everybody is paid on an hourly basis. It's not necessarily that I make $7.30 an hour. So obviously I make more than minimum wage. Yeah, it's true, but not everybody works like that. In manufacturing, you will find that many people work by what's called piecework, because if you're good at your job, the company wants to encourage you to make as much of the product as you can, whatever your function is. My function is a stamp out, using my machine, stamp out pieces of steel in certain shapes that get put into the product that we're manufacturing. So if I'm able to stamp out 50 of these per hour, then I get paid at a certain rate. Or possibly if I make more than 50 per hour, then I start getting more. Okay. Or it could be from the very beginning that I get, 75 cents for each one of these that I create during an hour, whatever. Okay. So if I'm being paid piece rates, how are we guaranteeing that I end up making minimum wage? It's up to the employer to make sure that everybody is making at least minimum wage. Now, the whole idea here behind piecework is that if you get very good at your job, you make a lot of money because you make a lot of the product for the company. The company is happy to pay you because they're getting a tremendous amount of efficiency from you, and they're getting all the parts that they want. They're perfectly happy to pay you whatever your piece rate is. You're a much better employee, much more effective employee than somebody who's not making a lot of the parts, but is making an hourly rate. You're going to be a lot cheaper because you're able to pound them out, and they're going to be able to look at how much it costs per item, as opposed to if I'm making if I'm working hourly and I make one, then it costs $7.25 to make that one. If I make two, then it cuts it in half. From a lot of perspectives, it's a lot easier if I can identify the actual cost of my product. Thing here is it's up to the company to determine that the person was making $7.25 an hour at least. So if I go through a week, and it's not done on a day-by-day basis, it's done on a pay week basis. If I go through and my piecework rate on Monday was fantastic, Tuesday was fantastic, Wednesday was just absolutely terrible, I had a lot of problems, the machine wasn't working, the material wasn't available, whatever. So Wednesday I had a really terrible day and I didn't make hardly anything because I couldn't get things to work. But then Thursday and Friday everything worked out. The company is supposed to keep track of the number of hours that I'm working, and then the company is supposed to calculate the amount of money that I made piecework, divide my pay by the number of hours, and it has to be greater than $7.25. If it's less than $7.25, the employer is going to have to make that up to me so that I'm not paid less than minimum wage. Obviously, I am intending on making more than minimum wage, so it's not like I have to give it back to the company if I make too much. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay, we just have to make sure we meet the minimums. Okay, who else has different types of pay that is different? Piece rate. Oh, commissions. So if I have a job where I work on commission, maybe I get a certain amount of salary, and then I make hopefully the majority of my money, my pay, based on the commissions for the sales that I made during the week. Same type of thing. Company is supposed to keep track of the number of hours I have involved, and then the company is supposed to calculate out what my actual earnings are, and then divide the earnings by the number of hours. And as long as that is greater than $7.25, the company is fine. But if it calculates out at lower than $7.25, the company is going to have to give me more money to bring me up to that $7.25. Okay. Moving right along. So there's some bookkeeping involved. All right. Another one of the things that becomes an interesting problem with the federal wage and hour law is independent contractors. Now, this is a problem. This is a problem area, okay? Because employers sometimes would prefer to not have any employees. I don't want to have any employees. How are you gonna make your product? Well, I'm not going to have any employees. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hire independent contractors, people who are in business for themselves, to do the work and then give me the product. So if they're independent contractors, they're not bound by the minimum wage. I don't have to deduct Social Security tax from their pay and then match that, so it's cheaper for me. I am not required to have workers' compensation insurance on those employees, those independent contractors. Okay, so there is a big what's the word I'm looking for? Temptation. There's a big temptation for employers to want to name employees, or to at least treat them as if they're independent contractors, which basically means that they're in business for themselves and they're basically selling you their time, not as an employee, but as a business person themselves. Okay, but the problem is that that's not necessarily always true. There are some tests out there as to whether somebody is actually an independent contractor. One of the jobs that I worked at, it was a construction company, communications construction, cable television construction. The company didn't want to have necessarily all employees. And so what they did was they would hire independent contractors to do the work. Our people were indeed independent contractors because they were allowed to work for whoever they wanted to. They could work for us, or they could work for our competitor. They could work where we told them, or they could work anywhere they wanted. They were, in fact, independent businessmen that did what they wanted to do. The big test is who controls the way the work is done. If you are hiring an independent contractor, you are telling them what you want the goal or the finished product to be. Now, when I was in the cable business, there were 4 or 5 different parts of the construction. One of them was to hang stainless steel cable from pole to pole. It's called strand, that supports the later on coaxial cable that carries the electronics. So we would hire people to come in and hang the strand. We didn't care how they did it. I didn't, when I was supervising them, I didn't follow them around and say, no, you're tightening that screw wrong. No, you got to put the bolt in this. I didn't have to do that. They were expected to know their job. I gave them an area to work in, told them to run the wire from this point to this point, hit all the telephone poles, put all the appropriate bracketing up. And then I left them alone. And then when they told me they were done, I would go and inspect their work to make sure that they did it properly. And then I would pay them. So I didn't control the way they did their work. I didn't control when they did their work. I didn't control how they did the work. I just told them what I wanted them to do, and they did it. They were indeed truly independent contractors. A lot of times people are lying because they don't want to have to pay the workers' comp insurance, or they don't want to pay the employment taxes, unemployment, and Social Security and workers' comp. It's expensive to have employees. So some people try to avoid having employees by lying about their status and saying, oh no, they're independent contractors. Okay. If you're interested, there is a case in your book, starting on page 729, Terry versus Sapphire Gentlemen's Club. This is a case where the Gentlemen's Club was hiring strippers, but they were telling the strippers that they were not employees, they were independent contractors. We have a stage, go dance. We're not going to control how you do it or what you do or whatever and so on. But that wasn't the truth. If you read through the case, they were very highly regulated by the company, where they were to be, when they were to be, how they were to behave, how they talked to the customers, how they did this and this and this and other things. So this was not a situation where they did not tell the employee how to do their job. They actually did tell them exactly how to do their job. At the end of the case, the court here says, no, the dancers were indeed employees. Here's another interesting part of the wage and hour law. What happens if you have a job where the performance of your job is different than where you punch in? For example, you work in a coal mine and there is a time clock at the entranceway to the mine. You go, you grab your time card and you punch in, and then you get in a rail car that takes you into the mine. It takes 5 minutes for that to happen. And then you get to an elevator that drops you down, down, down into the mine. And that takes another 5 minutes. And then you are transported by another coal car further into the mine underground. So that takes another 5 minutes. So you punched in and you have not begun working yet because it's taken you 15 minutes to get to your work site. Are you required to be paid for that time? Marlon, what do you think? Do you get paid to ride the cart?
Well, one of my jobs actually, when I worked at Ashley's, we had to ride around in a cart. So yeah, I think so.
You got paid?
Yeah, we had to clock in and then we had to go to like our little sections and stuff like that. So yeah.
All right. You're lucky because the law is that they don't have to pay you. It's called the portal to portal law, that the employer has the right to not pay you if you're not doing your job. If you're on the clock but not yet available to work, they don't have to pay you. So theoretically, in the job that I just described, you would spend 15 minutes getting to where you were going to do your work, and then they would begin paying you 15 minutes after you punched in. Same thing, you have another 15-minute travel out of the mine at the end of your day, they would not pay you for that 15 minutes. So yeah, that's one of the things that's out there. The Department of Labor have wrestled with time, whether employees should be paid for the time required for an employee to prepare to perform the job and the time required to end the day's performance. Where shifts of incoming and outgoing retail clerks must effectuate a transfer of the store's cash register between their shifts, where miners and factory workers must don uniforms or equipment in a locker room at the start of their shifts, perhaps shower and change at the end of their work shifts. The courts found that the employers were supposed to pay for that time. So Congress said, no, we didn't intend it that way. So Congress responded by passing the Portal to Portal Act. The Portal to Portal Act exempted employers from liability for future claims based on two categories of worker-related activities. No employer shall be subject to any liability or punishment under the Fair Labor Standards Act as amended on account of the failure of such employer to pay an employee overtime compensation for or on account of any of the following activities. 1, walking, riding, or traveling to or from the actual place of performance of the principal activity or activities which such employee is employed to perform. And 2, activities which are preliminary or post-preliminary to said principal activity or activities. So that's kind of an interesting little twist in the law that you are not entitled to pay. Now, if your employer decides they want to pay you, then that's great. They are a nice employer. They're not required to pay you, but they do. All right, that's minimum wage. Okay, so let's start talking about overtime pay, because that's another part of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Overtime pay or premium pay. Overtime pay. Employees are covered by the FLSA are entitled to overtime pay at 1 1/2 times their regular pay rate for hours worked in excess of 40 hours per work week. What's a work week? The law doesn't say what the work week is. So the employer can decide what the work week is. The term, a term the FLSA uses to signify 7 consecutive days. The law does not require that the work week start or end on any particular day of a calendar week. So if you say, oh, well, I'm going to use a calendar week, our work week is going to be Sunday to Saturday, that's great. If you decide that because of the way that we do our business, we want our work week to be Thursday through Wednesday. That's fine too. The government doesn't care as long as it's only a 7-day period. If you try to make it longer than 7 days, then they're going to get you on it. But it's any 7-day period. Oh, and by the way, as an employer, you can change that if you want to. You can't, if I choose Thursday to Wednesday, that's fine. But if I decide to change it a year from now to Monday through Sunday, I can do that, as long as my purpose in making the change is not to just cheat my employees out of overtime pay. Okay, so 40 hours in any work week. And work week can be any amount of time as long as it's 7 consecutive days. And the same problem occurs here with overtime pay that we had with minimum wage with people who aren't paid on an hourly basis. So if you were to take a look at somebody that was doing piecework, you remember they're getting paid by the pieces that they create during their day. Oh, goodness. What we have is we have to go back. Once again, the employer has to keep track of the hours, and the employer would have to calculate what the pay is and then make sure that that person received whatever. And I think here it comes down to they have to come up with an average pay. Regulation compute the hourly wages of employers and workers paid by commission, piece rate, so forth. I think they actually have to come up with an average rate of pay and then make sure that the piece rate work gets them up above premium pay, the time and a half for the time over 40. So it's not based necessarily on minimum wage here. Commissions and piecework, once again, create a small bookkeeping issue here. All right, now the biggest question that we have here as far as overtime pay goes is exempt employees. Okay, it's not that hard for a company to figure out whether you've worked 40 hours or not. And if you worked more than 40 hours, then you should be paid at time and a half. That's pretty easy to do. Question is, there are some employees that we don't want to pay overtime to. There are some employees that we want to pay salary. We're only going to pay you this amount of money, and it's you have to do whatever amount of work that we tell you you have to do. So if you're a salaried employee, you could end up working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week. You're not entitled to overtime or premium pay. Okay. The corresponding benefit is supposed to be that if you only work 30 hours a week, you still get your full pay. Okay. Most employers don't tend to run that way. Most employers tend to believe that if you're a salaried employee, that means that we can abuse you and just make you work more than 40 hours every single week. Once again, that's going to be a situation you want to take a look at somebody's management style. And do you want to work for somebody like that? Do you want to work for somebody who says, oh yeah, you're never going to work less than 40 hours a week, so don't have that little pipe dream. You're going to be working 50, 60 hours a week and I'm not paying you any overtime. So you better be happy with your pay. I don't think you want to work for somebody like that. That's a management issue more than it is a law issue. But who are these people that are exempt from the overtime laws? And that's exactly what we call them, is exempt employees. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if they can make you, well, not make you, but can you just clock out at 40 whether or not, like, because if you're getting paid the same either way, can you just clock out at 40 and just leave the work there?
Yes, you can. But then what is going to happen is your employer is going to be upset that you didn't put in the extra time. It's just the way that it works out there in the world, is that most managers, most employers believe that they're overpaying you for your time. So therefore, when you're required to work more than 40 hours, that they're just getting a little bit of equity back that they've already given you up front. That's their theory on it. Now, you look at it as, hey, my work week should be 40 hours like the rest of the world. I'm being paid for that and I'm happy with that. I don't want to work extra time. The problem that you're going to have is that, and we'll talk about this later, especially if you're one of these exempt employees, you're generally going to be considered management, and therefore you're not going to have a union that's going to be protecting you. So you'll be an at-will employee. And if your boss believes that you should be putting in more effort, hey, you should be in there working like the rest of us. We're all working 50 hours a week. What the heck's wrong with you? You'll probably be fired. Yeah, it's not illegal for them to say, you know what, we just don't want you here anymore because you're not a team player. So there's the danger that you take, Colton. All right. So what kind of employees can be exempt employees? But it does work out. Sometimes you do get to work that, you know, the weeks that have fewer hours in them. So, yeah. All right, executive employees. They're the first group, executive employees. The regulations under FLSA provide the following test. If the employee is compensated on a salary basis of a rate of not less than $455 per week, I'm going to ignore the American Samoa stuff in here, exclusive of board lodging or other facilities. So if I pay you $455 a week and I consider you to be an executive employee, you're exempt. But the 455 is not the only thing. Secondly, his or her primary duty is management of the enterprise in which the employee is employed, or of a customarily recognized department or subdivision thereof. You have to be a manager. He or she is customarily and regularly directs the work of two or more other employees. So you have to be a manager, you have to have people that you manage. So that's part of it. You have to be people that you directly supervise. And finally, number 4, he or she has the authority to hire or fire other employees, or to make suggestions and recommendations as to hiring and firing, advancement, promotion, or other change of status of the other employees. And that's given particular weight. So to be an executive employee, I have to have the authority to hire and fire. I have to regularly direct at least 2 or more people. My main duty is to manage the enterprise or some section of the enterprise, and I have to make more than $455 a week. That's an executive employee. That person would be exempt from the overtime laws. All right, the next one, administrative employees. The employee is compensated on a salary or fee base, a rate of not less than $455 per week. So we have that again. Second part, his or her primary duty is the performance of office or non-manual work directly related to the management or general business operations of the employer or the employee's customers. And finally, number 3, his or her primary duties include the exercise of discretion and independent judgment with respect to matters of significance. Okay, so to be an administrative exempt employee, we have that minimum salary of $455 again, non-manual work, management or business operations of the company, and you have your job includes the exercise of discretion or independent judgment. And those decisions have to be matters of significance. Okay. We'll come back to some of these, but I want to go through at least the first 3. Professional employees are, let's see, number 1, the employee is compensated on a salary or fee basis of not less than $455. His or her primary duty is performance of work, A, requiring knowledge of an advanced type in a field of science or learning customarily acquired by prolonged course of specialized intellectual instruction, or requiring invention, imagination, originality, or talent in a recognized field of artistic or creative endeavor. Are you a performer? Are you an actor? Are you a musician? Second one there seems to apply. Requiring invention, imagination, originality, or talent. Okay. The first one, I believe, is professional, requiring knowledge of an advanced type in a field of science or learning, customarily acquired by a prolonged course of specialized intellectual instruction. You require specific education to have that job. Okay, now it doesn't say it in here, but when I think of a professional employee, one of the big things that stands out to me is both the specialized and extensive education, and secondly, the requirement that you have a license to practice that particular profession. Okay, I'm a lawyer. For me to become a lawyer, I had to go to law school. I had to pass. I had to graduate from an American Bar Association accredited law school. And then I had to take a test that was administered by the state of Pennsylvania to prove that I had a basic level of knowledge about the law. And then I was given a license to practice. So I'm considered a professional because of the additional education and the license. Okay, so professional employees, they have to get that minimum pay of $455 a week, but in addition to that, they have to have prolonged education, and I think with a license, or be a performer, actor, musician, something along those lines. Okay, now going back to the administrative and the executive employees. First off, the $455 a week is ridiculous. Okay, that is a law that number has been in the law for a very long time, and it's not much. It's like $28,000 a year. Yeah, so we're talking about you not being allowed to make overtime pay because you make $28,000. That's not a very big pay. A bunch of years ago, we had a president by the name of Barack Obama. And under Barack Obama, he had determined that these rules were not fair. They were just too old and the numbers did not make any sense. So Barack Obama, and if you look in your book, there's actually a portion of the letter, memorandum for the Secretary of Labor is what it says. And this is from President Obama, talking about the fact that he believed that these rules regarding exempt employees were ridiculous, and basically wanted to change the rules. And what was supposed to happen was the $455 per week was supposed to go to $970 per week in 2016. Okay, so that would be, it used to be a salary of $23,660 per year. You were exempt from premium pay. The new regulation in 2016 was $970 a week, or $50,540 per year. Okay, that makes more sense to me. If I was making $28,000 a year and they were abusing me and making me work 50 hours a week for my entire life, I would quit. I wouldn't want that job. I'd be looking for a different job because that was just somebody that's being abusive to you. The $970 one, it became interesting because I remember in 2016, I was at Teal already at that point. There was a lot of discussion in the accounting department, actually, because many of the accountants that were being hired as graduating seniors from Teal. Of course, you go to the various CPA firms that have connections to Teal. Many of our graduates were not making, they were not being given starting salaries of that $50,000. They were making less than that. So what was going to happen was, if the law, or excuse me, if the CPA firms didn't raise them up to that $970 a week, then they would not be exempt employees, and these accountants would be entitled to overtime pay for time over 40 hours. Think that through. Any of you that have ever, or if there's any accounting students out there, what that would do, because during tax season, accountants are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Their pay would be ridiculous if you calculated it out at the premium pay. So what I think was going to happen is the various CPA firms were going to make the determination that they would have to hire based at that $970 a week, so that they wouldn't have to pay overtime, because the overtime would be a lot more expensive than just raising the weekly salary. What happened though? That I'm going to tell you right now, that didn't happen. What happened? What happened shortly after 2016? Well, what happened in 2016? Once again, I always like to say, when you look at the law, look at history. That did not go up in 2016. Why? Historically, what happened in 2016? Anybody? Natalie, what happened in 2016?
I'm not sure.
Holly Barna, what happened in 2016?
There was a new election.
Yep. Who got elected?
Donald Trump.
Who? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, that's right. Donald Trump, being a businessman who did not like to pay employees, reversed Obama's executive order and put it back to $455. Now, I'd have to check and see where it stands right now. That has bounced back and forth a few times. But what happened was, we had Donald Trump come in, and he felt that that was too generous of pay for salaried employees. So he put an executive order out changing what President Obama was trying to do. So I should take a look and see what that is right now. All right. So that is overtime pay, premium pay, your 40 hours. What else does the Federal Labor Standards Act do? Well, how about child labor? Do you ever think about that? Did you really, if you didn't read this chapter in advance, do you think we would be talking about child labor right now under the Fair Labor Standards Act, or what everybody refers to as the wage and hour law? Well, once again, let's go back in history. Does this country have a history of taking advantage of or exploiting children or child labor? Now, you think about, oh, you've got all these countries right now that have all their manufacturing over in Vietnam or Malaysia or China or whatever Oriental country that they just abuse the heck out of their populace, and they make pennies per day and all these terrible things. And oh yeah, they have child labor out there, and it's just absolutely terrible. Yeah, let's look at that. Okay, that does exist, and it is a problem in some parts of the world. Was that a problem in the United States? What do you think, Autumn? Was that a problem in the United States?
I remember previously talking in history classes that it was, but I think after they put the law in, it kind of has gotten a little bit better, hopefully.
No, you're exactly right. If you go back to the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, there were no laws in place. And what you had was you had a lot of child labor, a lot of exploitation of children, to the point where they were working in sweatshops. They were locked in buildings and doing sewing, seamstress work type things, or even the fact that they had small children working in coal mines and gold mines or whatever the heck kind of mine you have, because they fit through the holes a little bit bigger. You had people that were not getting educated. You had people who were developing physical deformities because they were working hard, physically demanding jobs at points in time when their bodies were still maturing. Yeah, we had that in this country. And that's exactly right. Autumn, you're exactly right. Once this law was passed, that changed. So we don't have a whole lot of problem with exploitation here anymore. But it is still something that the Department of Labor does pay attention to, because that is one of the things that is important under the Federal Labor Standards Act. So let's take a look at what the law does indeed take a look at. They received little or no formal education. Their wages were usually meager. As a result, drove down the wages of adult workers who held the same or similar jobs. 1918 case, blah, 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 the National Recovery Act, and finally the National Labor Standards Act. The FLSA does not prohibit all child labor. Rather, it proscribes, and proscribes means that they prevent or make illegal. Proscribe only oppressive child labor. The act prohibits the interstate shipment of goods from establishments employing oppressive child labor. It also prohibits oppressive child labor in any enterprise with 2 or more employees engaged in the production of goods for interstate commerce. The definition of oppressive child labor is crucial to the administration of the act. The act defines oppressive child labor by using age restrictions and identifying hazardous occupations. Employing minors under age 18 in any occupation identified as hazardous by the Secretary of Labor is prohibited. At present, a number of occupations have been identified as hazardous by the Secretary of Labor, including the following. So here's a list of hazardous activities that minors are not allowed to work at. Coal mining or mining other than coal. Occupations in or about plants manufacturing explosives or articles containing explosive components. Occupations involving operation of motor-driven hoisting apparatus. Logging or sawmilling occupations. Occupations involving exposure to radioactive substances. Occupations of motor vehicle operator or helper. Occupations involving operation of power-driven woodworking machines. Occupations involving operation of power-driven metalworking, forming, punching, or shearing machines. I worked in a company that had all of those machines, and I'm going to tell you what, that was a scary place. I thought it was a big shot. I'd go walk through the factory. I was the accountant, and I came out of there going, I don't want to work in there. Occupations in or about slaughtering or meatpacking plants or rendering plants. Excuse me, throat getting dry. Occupations involving the manufacture of brick, tile, or related products. Occupations involving the operation of circular saws, hand saws, or guillotine shears. Occupations involving wrecking, demolition, and shipbreaking. Okay, so there's a list of dangerous, hazardous occupations as determined by the Department of Labor. Now, you're at 18, you've reached the age of majority, and so child labor laws no longer apply to you. But if you are under 18 years of age, these rules do apply to you. And we have 2 sets of rules out here. We have rules for those 14 to 16, and another set of rules for those 16 to 18. Okay, so if you are 16 to 18, You may work in certain non-hazardous occupations, and minors aged 14 to 16 may be employed in non-manufacturing or non-mining operations for limited hours outside of school hours. Minors under age 14 can be employed only in agriculture under specific limitations and parental guidance and consent. Regulations limiting work by minors 14 to 16 further specify that minors' hours between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. may not exceed 18 hours per week when school is in session, or 40 hours per week when school is not in session, nor may they exceed 3 hours per day when school is in session, or 8 hours per day when school is not in session. Okay, so if you are 14 to 16, you cannot work more than 18 hours a week while school is in session. 16 to 18, I'm guessing there's no limitation on the number of hours you can work per day or per week, but you're not allowed to work in a hazardous occupation. Okay. Nobody's allowed, if you're under 18, you're not allowed to work in any kind of a hazardous occupation. If you're 14 to 16, you can only work 18 hours a week or 40 hours a week if school's not in session. And if you're 16 to 18, the only limitation here is that you cannot work in a hazardous occupation as defined by the Department of Labor. Okay. Now, there are certain jobs that are not considered hazardous by law. Newspaper carriers who are engaged in delivering newspapers to consumers, minors who are hired as actors or performers in movies, radio, television, or theatrical production, and minors who are employed by their parents or persons standing in the place of parents in occupations other than mining, manufacturing, mining, or other identified as hazardous by the Secretary of Labor. Guess what you generally find those kids under 14 doing? Farming, because it becomes a family farm and they end up doing the farming. All right, another case in the book here where you can read where it was a boarding school, the students were living at the school. They were under 18, I think also under 16. And the question was whether they were working for the school or they were just doing volunteer maintenance and whatnot on the school. Supreme Court, I believe, in this particular case came out and said, no, we have to look out for the welfare of the children. And because of the way that this was structured, they were actually physically working for the school, and it then violated the child labor laws under the FLSA. All right. All right, at the very end of the chapter here. The Federal Labor Standards Act is enforced by the Department of Labor, the DOL. The Secretary of Labor is authorized to file suit on behalf of employees seeking to collect wages and overtime, and may also recover liquidated damages in an amount equal to the amount of wages owed. All right, so this is a big deal, what I just said. The Secretary of Labor is authorized to sue on behalf of an employee that was mistreated under the Federal Labor Standards Act. Think that through. You don't have to sue the employer. Hey, you were cheated out of overtime pay, or you were cheated out of, some sort of wages. Can you sue your employer? Sure you can. But why would you bother? Just go to the Department of Labor and make a complaint. Hey, for the past 5 years, I've been working at this company and I was not an exempt employee, but they never paid me for overtime. And I think I'm entitled to a lot of pay because they owe me overtime because I wasn't exempt. And you know what the federal government will do? The Department of Labor will do? They'll investigate it. They'll ask the employer about it. They'll ask for employment records. You'll turn over whatever records you have to them. And if they determine that you have a legitimate case, they prosecute it for you. It's not just the government going after the bad guy because we want to punish the bad guy. They're actually taking on the lawsuit so that you can collect the damages from the employer. That's extraordinary. You don't have to go out and hire a lawyer. You just have the government do it for you. They'll do it. And they'll give you whatever they get from the employer. Okay. Now, other things that are in this chapter, not in this chapter, this section of this chapter, once the employee makes the complaint and the Department of Labor gets involved, sometimes what will happen is the employer will want to settle the case. Hey, let's just get rid of this. Let's get out of court. I'll give you this amount of money if you just go away and never bother me again. Well, once you have the federal government involved, they won't stop until you've gotten all of the money that you're entitled to. So employees generally may not release employers for less than the full amount owing, nor may employees waive the rights to compensation under the act. Okay, so if I go back and determine that I was cheated out of overtime for the past 2 years, and that amount adds up to $20,000, I can sue for that myself, or I can go to the Department of Labor and make a complaint, give them my information, they'll investigate, and then they'll prosecute the employer. They'll win, because if you've done your work right and you actually are owed the money, then you're entitled to the money. They will not let you settle for less than the amount you're owed. So if I determine, that, hey, I was cheated out of $20,000 worth of overtime pay, and we start this lawsuit, and the employer comes to me and says, hey, let's not bother going through the lawsuit. Let's just settle. I'll give you $10,000 right now. We don't go through the lawsuit. I'm not allowed to take it, because since the government's involved, they will not let you settle for less than the full amount that's owed. They also have something that they're referring to as liquidated damages. And basically that means that if the court thinks that the employer is enough of a bad guy, that they make a habit of doing this, or it was really an abusive thing that they did and they should have known that it was wrong type thing, then the government has, or the courts have, the authority to enter in damages of double what you were owed. So if the liquidated damages portion of this is going to step in, if I was owed $20,000 and then I win in the court, they'll award me the $20,000 that I was cheated, but they have the ability to order me an additional $20,000 as compensation for the way that I was treated by the employer. And finally, the FLSA also prohibits retaliation against employees who invoke the statute's protections. These are called whistleblower sections to the laws. Okay. And this is a big deal, and you're going to find a lot of this in the employment things that we're going to talk about, because how does the government know that there's a problem going on? Is the Department of Labor out there auditing everybody's payroll records? No, not necessarily. Maybe they do that if they have some sort of an inkling that there's something going wrong. But if there's no complaints out there against an employer, why would they do that? The government agencies aren't over budgeted. They're not overfunded. They're not out looking for cold calls on companies to see, hey, are you doing something wrong? No, they're not doing that. So somebody has to make a complaint before the government gets involved. Okay, that's a whistleblower. That's somebody who's saying, hey, I was treated unfairly. Now, under the law, you are protected. The employer is not allowed to retaliate against you physically emotionally or by firing you or anything along those lines. If they try to do something to affect your employment status, they're wrong. They can't do that. Okay. 3:40, we're a couple minutes early than the 3:50, I guess, that we should be terminating, but that's the end of the chapter. Does anybody have any questions? I like starting with this particular law because I think it's really the basis of everything that comes after this. You know, everything else is going to be versions of the employer-employee relationship, but this is the federal law that sets everything up. Now, remember, there are still some employees out there that don't fall under the federal law because they don't really work in interstate commerce. But what you'll find is that every state has a law very similar to the FLSA with regard to minimum wage, to exempt employees and overtime pay and child labor. Every state has a law that's very similar in the protections that they allow. This is not an area where the federal government has completely taken over the entire area. The states are still allowed to pass laws here. Of course, if there's a conflict between a state and the federal law applies, but the state is also passing a law very similar to what we've looked at. That's why you can have certain states that have a higher minimum wage than the federal law, because if Pennsylvania were to say, okay, in their employment law, their version of the FLSA, that minimum wage is going to be $12 an hour, then it will be. Well, wait a minute, federal law says $7.25. Yeah, it's true. But the way that works is if more protection is available from the state than the federal government's going to give you, then they're going to use the state number. If the state said, minimum wage is $4 an hour, no, it's too bad. Federal law says $7.25, so we're going to use their number because we should. Okay, any questions? If there are no questions, then just to let you know, it is my expectation that we will remain remote next Tuesday. My son is still in the hospital. There is improvement. He's no longer critical, but there is really no plan for him being released from the hospital as of right now. So that being said, I anticipate that we will still be remote on Tuesday. If that changes, you'll get an email from me telling you that, but I wouldn't expect that to change. I've recorded this. I will post it out there. I did post last Tuesday's class. So next class, we will do chapter 21. What is chapter 21? 21, employees' safety nets, unemployment and workers' compensation, Social Security and retirement plans. So we'll start chapter 21 on Tuesday. There's some really interesting information in there. Social Security and retirement, ERISA, very interesting sections. So if there's no questions, then that's it. See you guys on Tuesday.
I have a question, but it doesn't necessarily pertain to like the class stuff, but like it does pertain to like the child like labor stuff a little bit. So my high school had like an advanced graphic design class.
Okay.
And the students in the advanced graphic design class started making designs like in their class that they would like print on t-shirts that they end up selling for like football game, like football merch and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What would that legally fall under laws or whatever?
So did the school sold the t-shirts? The students didn't sell the t-shirts?
Yeah, it was like the school district. It was like the football football team technically did.
Yeah, my guess is that they would probably, it was connected to a class, a graphic design class.
Yeah.
Okay. The bigger question you have is, in my mind, copyright protection. you know, because that was somebody's work. You could theoretically maybe argue the fact that whoever was the artist that drew those up should have been compensated for the artwork, because theoretically they could have trademarked it. Or copyrighted it. But as far as the other side, you'll find that there's a lot of leeway given as far as when you get to educational issues. So if the school was going to say that that was an educational program, that the students, you know, what you got out of it was the education as opposed to the money that they were raising, the school district would probably get away with that. Another one of the things that's actually in the law that I didn't bring up is that there's another sub-minimum wage section out there that deals with rehabilitation programs. Up in Erie, where I live, we have this place called the Gertrude Barber Center, and they work with handicapped people, mostly with mental handicaps, mental retardation, things like that. And they provide training for them. And sometimes in the training, they're actually producing a product that the Barber Center sells. Well, they do have to be paid to do that, but it doesn't have to be minimum wage.
Mm.
So there's a lot of little twists and turns in the law. The school district one, I'd say that they would rely on it being an educational opportunity. You know, like I said, I think you probably would have a better copyright issue there.
That makes a lot of sense. I was just curious because like they made the designs and then some of the students learned how to like press like the shirts and use like the actual like shirt presses. And so I was just like curious about it. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's doing screen printing is a pretty lucrative business, actually. So those kids that were doing it, they had the chance of making some big money.
Yeah. Some of them I think actually ended up trying to go towards like that in the end anyhow, like for their future career. So
yeah, I actually tried to start a screen printing business once. My one son wasn't doing very well in his career, so I decided I was going to front him the money to get him into screen printing. But the one piece of it that we didn't have, well, two pieces, we didn't have somebody that would willing to go out and try and sell the product, and then secondly, we didn't have anybody to do the artwork.
well, thank you very much.
All right, Holly, let's see you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.